we had a number of folks reach out with curiosity after last Sunday, asking if there was a reason why we made no public mention of what had happened at the rally of former President Donald Trump last Saturday. And the honest answer is it was really soon, really recent, and we wanted to take a moment as a team to just kind of think about not what we think, but how we want to articulate what we think about this phrase, this topic that's kind of dominated the airwaves, political violence. What do we think about political violence? The short answer as a community, just speaking as pastors, as staff, as leadership, is that we are anti. We are against political violence. And as such, of course, we condemn the violence that was attempted against the former president last weekend. But it's important, we felt, that when we're naming political violence, when we're naming this thing that we are against, that we get even more specific. And to be perfectly honest, I don't have the time this morning to get exhaustively specific, but it's just, we wanted to name, we live in a state where the Wilmington Massacre took place in the late 1800s. We live in a country that has been both direct or indirect in funding or perpetuating the sort of regime change that was attempted last weekend in other countries pretty indiscriminately. We live in a country that's continuing to fund the annihilation of the people of Gaza today, right now. We are subservient to an economic system that is destroying our planet and that is putting people in other parts of the country into the most oppressive and exploitive of working conditions. And so, obviously I could go on. But the point is simple, to say that in standing against political violence, we need to stand against all political violence. And that's going to look different for each of us individually, and it's going to look different as a community. There's only so much that we can do. But as we're remembering to breathe, part of that work is also remembering just the scope of what's going on, and sort of being willing to stand together, not look past it, but look at it and at times name it. And so to anyone who is curious about how we feel about political violence, we are against it, but all of it, and we'll continue to be, and we'll kind of invite all of you into that. There's no really good way for me to transition from that. So I'm just going to name the awkwardness and get right into some opportunities that are hopefully more exciting, more hopeful. The first of which, if you are a young adult, which we define quite liberally here as 20, 30-something, we actually have a group that is particularly targeted towards that age range, and they are grabbing lunch together immediately following next week's service on the 28th. They're going to Dave's Hot Chicken, and that's going to be a good time. So if you are part of that age range and you want to get connected to other folks in this community, then I would encourage you to do that. Unless your only excuse is if you'd rather be at the next thing I'm announcing, which is our monthly Kindred Brunch, which is taking place, I believe, at Petty Thieves, but I bet if you follow that QR code, you will be able to know for sure. But that is also happening following next week's service. For those who don't know, Kindred is our LGBTQ leadership group, kind of behind everything we do around LGBTQ inclusion, liberation, elevation, and they get together once a month, and so this is an opportunity to join them for that. Speaking of, we have a lot of Pride Parade, because if you live in Charlotte, we get to like triple dip. We have Pride Month in June, we have Black Pride Month in July, and then we have the parade in August. And so sort of in anticipation of that, we have a few more things. Our shirts are now available. You're going to see them being sold here on site in the coming weeks, but if you want to get a jump on that, you can follow that QR code to order a shirt for the parade. All of that funding kind of goes to further fuel our efforts in the parade. There is an interfaith service, I think that's the next slide. There is an interfaith service happening the week prior to the parade, and you can learn more about that. We're going to send more information about that via social media and the newsletter, but it's at 4 p.m. on April 12th, I believe, at Sacred Souls Church, and it's just a great, really encouraging experience to see all folks from different faith backgrounds and church traditions come together and just celebrate together with that kind of unity. Last, I believe, Pride-related thing, we did mention this last week, but on the 18th itself, on Pride Parade Day, we're not going to be having our normal service. We're going to be kind of hanging out outside or maybe inside if it's really hot with refreshments and things like that, with an eye towards encouraging folks to go to the parade. And so if you're like, I've wanted to go, I've always wanted to go, but I don't have anyone to go with, now you do. You can show up here at 11 and get some water and get some refreshments and get people who you can either go march with or find a shady spot on the sidelines and celebrate with our church and with our broader Charlotte community. So all of that is coming up. One more thing. I promise, just one more thing. In September, on September 8th, we are going to be doing something that's kind of a long time coming. We didn't necessarily think it was going to happen this soon, but we are going to be changing our service time. Now, I want to be super clear about what this means. We are not at this stage going to 2 services. That might be coming in the future. But what we are going to be doing is taking our service time from 10 a.m. to 10:30. And yes, some of this is a ploy to get some of you to arrive on time. It's only going to work for about 3 weeks until you realize the new service time, then you'll be 15 minutes late to that. But no, but really what it is, it has nothing to do with that. That's just a side perk. The main motivation is many of you are coming from all over the place. You're coming from places that can be very difficult for you to get here. I mean, it's fine on a Sunday morning when the traffic's not bad, but if you're coming from midweek things on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, it can be really tough. And so what this will do is it'll broaden the window in the morning for us to offer some of our programming like at 9 a.m. or 9:30 before the service starts. So things like preface, shadology, blocks, book clubs, and things like that. We'll have the opportunity to periodically offer them on Sunday morning, just making it so much easier for some folks who couldn't get here midweek to be part of those things. So we're going to continue to remind you about that. Just a 30-minute change, but that's coming a little over a month from now. And like I said, we'll let you know when it's going to happen. And then really the last thing, just everything I just named, all the things related to what we're doing, even the thing, even talking about changing times in this building, like this building, us having access to this, all of this is only possible with those of you who continue to support us financially. So just weekly reminder, our goal each month is to increase our recurring giving by $600 a month. That allows us to be strategic, it allows us to be generous, it allows us to be intentional. We are so grateful for those of you who continue to support us in this way. Thanks for being here. Oh, fun, a lot of me talking, now it's a lot of you talking. Take a minute or so in whatever way that feels comfortable to you and greet the folks around you.
morning. Yeah, you can applaud for that, I guess. Great. Matt knows how to walk. Awesome. I'm the lead pastor here at Watershed. Thank you for being here this morning. In case it's not crystal clear, that was a excerpt of a 2-minute excerpt of a thing that I do almost every week, a trail run here in Charlotte. I first started running this trail a little over a decade ago. My kids were taking tennis lessons nearby, and they were in that phase where they didn't want me to watch them do stuff. And so I had to find something else to do, and I found this trail, and I started to run this trail. And then my kids stopped taking tennis lessons, lost interest, and I didn't return to the trail until a little while later, after my third knee surgery. My physician said, "Hey, I know you do a lot of running, but you're going to have to curve that back to about 3 miles a week, and you need to get on like a natural surface, and you don't need to run. You need to walk." And I had forgotten about the trail, so to speak. And then a little later on, when I realized, okay, I'm missing something. I want that outside experience, and I can't run on asphalt. I thought, oh man, there's that trail. There's that trail that I used to run when my kids played tennis. And so in 2018, I started driving across town, about a 20-minute drive, with our trusty K9 and what some would consider my best friend on the planet, our dog, Cousin Johnny, which is the greatest name on the planet. But initially, this was just a workout. It was, I want to get my heart rate up. I want to push myself, see how fast I can go. But then while I was doing this every week, there was this intersection of other things unfolding in my life. 2018, when I returned to doing this, my dad's illness became terminal. He went into hospice for the next 3 years. During these same 3 years, our beloved family of 5 here in Charlotte underwent some really significant challenges and setbacks. Of course, there was a little thing called a pandemic. There was huge social and political upheaval in that time frame. In 2021, my dad passed, and then from 21 to 23, a lot of upheaval here at Watershed, financially, organizationally. And it wasn't one thing. It was like this convergence, this bundling of a bunch of things that carried, at least for me, never before experienced loads of stress and anxiety. 2019 is when I started therapy, and that's been super helpful, and I've continued to do that. But, I don't know. About a year into this experience, I realized that I wasn't returning to the trail for exercise. About a year into it, I started to realize that there is really at least one constant in my life, that every week, every Saturday usually, rain, heat, snow, shine, it didn't matter. Johnny and I were going to get in my vehicle, we're going to drive across town, and we were going to, for 30 or 40 minutes, walk this trail. We are in week 4 of a series entitled Patterns of Recognition, where we've been exploring some pretty provocative ideas or questions around sacraments and rituals and spiritual practices. From my late 20s to my late 40s, just about every morning, I had this spiritual discipline, if that language connects, of getting up, getting a cup of coffee, and journaling and praying and engaging the scriptures. In the attic of our house are boxes filled with journals, and on the pages of these journals, every question, every yearning, every observation sort of vomiting itself onto those pages. That was my spiritual discipline routine. But then as I approached my late 40s and into my early 50s, some things started to shift for me. I know for some of you, you have a similar story where your theological, your spiritual worldview started to tilt in a different direction, started to make sense in a different way. Absolutes became less absolute. Things that I thought I could count on in terms of categories of certainty, I started to realize had way more theory, way more assumptions, unchallenged assumptions than I realized. A couple of weeks ago, Blair and David spent some time talking about sort of the 4 universals here at Watershed. As a matter of fact, they all kind of start with C. So if you're a recovering Baptist, that's really helpful if you have things that begin with the same letter. But it was communion, curiosity, contradiction, and then something called compost. And the idea behind compost is this conviction that borders or bordered spaces are generative. Things like death and failure and endings generate and produce conditions for new possibilities. And I wanted to start here this morning, and I thought it was worth mentioning because when I look back, things were changing for me. Things were coming to an end. There were ideas or past-held assumptions that were dying. There was a letting go of sorts, but I started to experience new things, generous new things, new possibilities. It felt like there was new wine, and the old wineskins they didn't work anymore for the new wine. In Luke's gospel, there's this really interesting exchange between Jesus and some of the Pharisees where they asked the question, when will the kingdom of God come? In the first century, it was sort of normal for cultures and societies as a way of attempting to describe reality, as a way of attempting to describe God. They would anthropomorphize God through the metaphor of kingdom. Kingdoms like Persia and Egypt and Rome, they wielded enormous amounts of power, often abusive, violent power, but power nonetheless. And so it was really normal in that day and age for cultures and kingdoms to see God as monarchical. God is this ultimate king over an ultimate kingdom, whether that's a heavenly kingdom or an earthly kingdom. God was anthropomorphized through nature as well, but for today's discussion, and I don't want to point this out, the kingdom language mattered deeply to the people in Jesus' time because of what they were going through. And when the Pharisees asked, when will God's kingdom arrive, their bordered way of understanding God was through a geopolitical framework. An earthly kingdom. They would use heavenly language, but the kingdom that conquers, the kingdom that's territorial or militaristic or monarchical, that's their bordered conviction. That's the way they're showing up to the conversation in terms of how they imagine God to ultimately become materialized. And so when they ask Jesus this question, he gives a response that doesn't validate that. In fact, it's a jarring response. When, Jesus, will the kingdom come? When will we have a military? When will we have wealth and power to vanquish the enemy that's not only occupying our whole homeland, but brutalizing our people? And Jesus says this, well, actually, the coming of the kingdom of God is not something that can be observed. Oh, okay, keep going. Nor will people say, here it is, or there it is, because the kingdom of God is within you. The kingdom of God, the divine reality, the divine order, the divine realm is within you. Wait, what? Wait a minute. Within us? No, wait a minute. Like, we need chariots, we need swords, we need thrones. It's as though Jesus is saying, look, your imagination for this is way too small. It's limited to power wielding. It's limited to enemy crushing, nation conquering, a king exacting his will or his authority through a kingdom. You know, like the kingdoms that are exacting their will and their power onto you. And it's like Jesus is saying, but have you ever considered something outside of your present imagination? What about a kingdom that is infinitely small as it is infinitely big? What about a kingdom or a presence that's interwoven, incarnate, essential? A kingdom that's hidden or buried within the deepest recesses of yourself. This kingdom is within. This kingdom is amidst you. In some translations, it says it's in your heart. What? No. Let me say it again. Chariots, horses, land, power. And this would have blown the minds of the Pharisees or angered them. because it wasn't a kingdom until somebody was dead or in shackles or bleeding or subjugated. That's a kingdom. There was this way for Jesus' listeners to experience the divine that he's pointing them to, that lives beyond the borders of their understanding and even of our understanding or our consciousness. This shared collaborative overlap, a oneness with God, which is biblical if that matters to you, because Jesus literally asked, he prayed, God, if they could just experience the same sort of oneness that I experience with you, that would just be incredible. A unification where you're not sure where you end and God begins, or vice versa, where it's hard to discern if you're hearing your own egocentric voice or something that's speaking out of you that's from the deepest place of your most authentic self. The kingdom is in your heart. It's been my experience that no matter how informed that I think that I am, how productive, how well I'm performing, or how proficient or efficient my life is ordered, it's really hard on most days to really know what my heart needs. It's hard. And it's even harder when I do know what my heart needs, I'm not always sure how to give my heart what it needs, which brings me back to the trail. I'm going to try to describe my experience doing this after the last 6 years or so. Initially, my core motivation was exercise, but after a few months in, there's some things that started to change for me, and observations and experiences, and they're not like so far off the map of reality that I don't want to scare you with that statement, but they became meaningful for me in relevant ways. And I can't name every experience or how to connect all the dots, but one of the things I noticed was there was like this longing to be there. Can you guys pull the volume down on that for me, please? There was this longing to be there, almost like a homesickness. I would sometimes drive in that part of town. I don't usually go to that part of town, but when I would, it was like there was this yearning to stop whatever I was doing and to return to this trail. I noticed that when I entered into the forest, you could kind of see it at the beginning of the footage where the trees and the foliage kind of overlap. It's almost like an archway, and you're stepping down into what feels like a completely different world. The temperature is different. The light is different. The odor is different. The terrain is different. When I walk across this trail, or when I run across this trail, there's roots and rocks and debris. And so you have to be present to every step, else you stumble and fall, which I have firsthand experience in. At least once. I wiped out and sprained my ankle and couldn't go back for a month. I was telling Blair this past week, I've gone through 6 different seasonal changes, 6 seasonal rotations doing this. And it's interesting. I've noticed that like in the summer, because the greenery is so plush, I can't really see too far off in the distance, but because there's no leaves on the ground, those get blown off during the spring, I can see every step. I have to be very careful because there's roots and rocks, and again, lest you stumble. When it's fall and winter, all the leaves fall. And it's like, oh my gosh, you can see for what feels like forever. You can see 2 hillsides away, and you can see deer, and you can see all sorts of wildlife. But it's really hard to know what's underneath the forage that's now on the forest floor. It's like, where are the roots? And so there's a layer between how I'm finding my footing and the things that can trip me up. Last year, a storm blew through and downed a bunch of trees. And so Johnny and I had to figure out how to kind of work around some of the blockage. They had shut part of the trail off. And eventually, the Parks and Rec department came in, and they cleaned up the trail, and they lopped off trees. And in doing so, I don't know why they did this, but they decided to do this with one of the stumps. And that's something. And then a few hundred yards later, they did it again. It's like they did this a couple of different times. Initially, I didn't really think too much about it. I'm like, I bet there was some employee that thought this will be fun. But there was this one particular Saturday when I decided to pause and kind of take a closer look. And I remember saying to Johnny, because yes, I talked to my dog, I said, Johnny, look, the forest is smiling at us. And it didn't happen that day, but over time, I found myself starting to stop at one or both of these locations. And I know it's just a stump, and it's just tubing stapled to a tree. But that question kept surfacing. Why is the forest smiling? What's behind the smile? What is this unrequested kindness? It's like, is this kindness about me? Is it about just the way this forest is speaking? Is this a smile of joy or contentment because the forest is just content to be itself? Maybe it's a playful or mischievous smile. You know, like the smile of a prankster of sorts, you know? Like the forest is up to something, like it knows something that I don't, at least not yet. And it can't keep a straight face because it just knows how much I'm going to love the punchline. Or it just knows that there's the surprise, the big reveal at the end is going to be so amazing. It's just a stump. It's just tubing stapled to a tree. An inanimate object, you know, like flowers of the field, or the birds of the air, or fish and loaves, or mustard seed, or yeast, or a treasure hidden in a field, or bread and wine. Why is the forest smiling? In Galatians, Paul writes, the fruit of the Spirit is love and joy and peace and patience. The fruit of this Spirit is kindness and goodness, faithfulness. It's gentleness and self-control. And then he says, against such thing there is no law. And I was thinking how laws are humanity's ways of attempting to order the world in a particular way, you know? And it's as though Paul is suggesting that spiritual outcomes, the animation of the divine in our lives and through our lives, the emotions that make us human and really make us divine, can neither be legislated in or out of existence. It takes something else. And I mentioned this because I noticed how a step or two into the forest, on some days, all of a sudden I am flooded with unexpected emotion, blindsided by something that I needed to process and didn't know it, and not even sure what I'm processing. Sometimes it's an evacuation of fear or anger or sadness. And sometimes I'm just a little choked up, and sometimes I'm weeping. This is making way then. It's a self-emptying process that all of a sudden the things that Paul mentioned are the things that materialize by the time I leave. Sometimes there's experiences of epiphany and experiences of clarity. In fact, I would argue that I never leave the way I came in. There's always something that has happened. It's almost humorous. It's like if I'm having a tough time, one of the things my therapist says is, have you been to the forest lately? And I'm like, man, get off my back. I'll get there as soon as I can. Why is the forest smiling? In his book, What Makes You Bloom, Cultivating a Practice for Connecting with Your Divine Self, Kevin Garcia describes his personal journey out of spiritual disciplines and into spiritual practices. And I want to tell you there's a difference here if you have the eyes to see it. Spiritual disciplines, if you grew up with sort of that terminology and that practice, are really these repeated practices that are meant to tune our ears to God, to modify our identity to the identity and the character and the nature of Christ, so that you can love and serve the world or bring more people into that belief system, if I'm being perfectly honest. And at some level, that sounds innocent, and it might be. Like, I don't look at my past spiritual discipline with any sort of indignation. For the season of my life, it was deeply meaningful, but within the context of rigid structures, within the context of fundamentalism and evangelicalism, it's not as simple. It's not. Within these structures, 100% of the discretion around what it means to hear God's voice or to have a character that is reflected, that is an image of Jesus or Christ, is left up to the authority structure, the people in charge. There's a pastor here that I've kind of gotten connected to recently, and like one of the things he really is excited about, he's a new pastor to a new church, and one of the first things he expressed excitement about, and was a little bit shocking, was at our church, the pastor answers only to God. I'm like, oh, let me float that one in my house and see how that works. See how Donna responds to that.